Hi, this is Ramesh Ponnuru with National Review and Time Magazine, welcoming you to Blogging Heads. I'm with Jonathan Chait, a senior editor at The New Republic and the author of, what was it again, Jonathan? The Big Con?
The Big Con.
That's right. Yeah. I only blurbed the book, but as I get older, I'm forgetting these things.
You probably do so many blurbs.
Yeah, that's right. People are just knocking down my door because of the Ponnuru marketing magic.
Yeah.
So we figured, we've both written recently about the question of flip-flops in the presidential campaign. And
yes.
John wrote in The New Republic, I guess the simplest way to describe it is that you think and fear that the flip-flop attack on Obama might be effective, and right. I think and fear that it won't be.
Yeah, first of all, I was just writing totally about the politics of it, aside from the correctness of the charge. Politically, I was sort of arguing with my colleague, Noam, and it was one of those things where we're sort of like, I'm 60-40 one side and he's 60-40 the other side, but we sort of inflate the disagreements to have a debate. Mm-hmm. But, I do think that this is really sort of had managed to take control of the media narrative, which is to say, and it's not the best way for McCain to be attacking Obama, but it certainly is a way, and it's getting a lot of traction. I think the media basically has just been echoing McCain's message, and whenever you can get the media to echo your message and to write bad things about the other candidate, that's pretty good for you.
Yeah, I would think though that Obama's reversals have been so swift and on so many issues that the press was going to write about them anyway. And I'm actually not sure it makes all that much sense for McCain to be zeroing in on this. The flip-flop story is a perfect story for the press because it doesn't have to evaluate the substantive merits of people's positions. It can simply track their changes over time. And of course, reporters in the establishment press are much more comfortable doing that. So, in a way, this story was just going to be written regardless of what McCain did. And yes, it is true that it's not. I agree with you, of course, that it's not the most effective attack, but I actually think it sort of precludes or at least undercuts possibly more effective attacks. It's one thing to use the flip-flops in order to paint somebody as weak and indecisive or dishonest, but if you're just doing it to say that he has no core convictions, well, haven't conservatives been spending, and Republicans been spending months saying that Obama is in fact a dangerous leftist, and how do you make both of those attacks simultaneously? And if you have to choose between them, the leftism one thing seems to me to be a stronger one politically.
That's true, although, you and my colleague Noam Schreiber, I think, maybe are overestimating the intellectual sophistication of the voters. And I don't think that many people are going to say, hey, that's a contradiction if they're going to attack Obama as a liberal later on. Some people will notice that, but, I don't know if the swing electorate they're going for, how many people are really going to pick up on that contradiction and are going to, look at how many people, are really concerned about Reverend Wright, his minister, and that he's a Muslim. So I guess I'm more cynical than you are. I think they can. I think they can do both.
Well, let me try to put it this way. I think that if you make Obama out, if you give him the image as a sort of a ruthless pragmatist, and you get people to think of him in those terms, that is not an entirely bad thing from the voters' perspective. And that they will, some voters can hold these sort of contradictory thoughts in their head, but some voters, they're only going to have a single image of this guy, and McCain is better off with them thinking he's a zealot, a liberal zealot, than that he's that he's convictionless and will do whatever it takes. He's Clinton. That, I think, is a very bad thing from the McCain campaign's perspective. But,
I think the liberal attack was always going to be hard to make, in part just because of Obama's appearance. He's got this very measured presentation. He's very thoughtful, very nuanced, very
professorial.
Very good about, acknowledging the other side's point of view. So I just don't think he was going to come across. But I think where there's a potential weakness that they're drilling down on is people think, who is this guy? Is it too good to be true? It seems a little phony. Where does he come from? And the fact that he's black, I think, adds to a lot of these questions, which also leads to the darker stuff like, is he a Muslim? Is he some kind of secret radical? So I think if you can, I think what they're trying to do, if I'm to give them credit for having a clever strategy, it's to, and maybe we shouldn't be doing that because, they don't always have a clever strategy, but it's to just destroy the perception of him having any honesty or moral core, just to raise the question, who is he? What does he believe in? Anything? Where, can you trust him on anything?
Right.
And those are the kind of questions that they're raising. And then that sort of gives them an in to take him on anything, just to raise the broader question of who is this guy? And I think it also is going to make it harder. When you see some of these interviews with voters who think he's a Muslim, and the reporter says, well, he says he's a Christian. So when they say, well, I hear what he says. Again, if you destroy the trust issue,
right,
a lot of these other issues, these other doubts are gonna be stronger.
I guess we've skipped one, sort of obvious point, which is the flip side of all this press coverage of Obama's flip-flops is that, particularly when the McCain campaign raises it, it does also tend to highlight the issue of McCain's own flip-flops, because...
And yet somehow this has not been... featured at all in the press, or very, very little. There's been very, very little attention paid to McCain's flip-flopping, I think that's a pejorative word, and look,
shifts
here's
in
a guy
position,
who's had some very dramatic policy reversals, and you've written a lot about it, and I think you've had a very intellectually honest point of view in saying basically, look, here's a guy who's moving our way. We should embrace it, whether or not it's genuine. It doesn't matter. I think that's your argument, right? All that matters is what he's going to do. If he's tying himself to these positions and these advisors and so on, and he's kind of institutionally stuck with it, then he's going to do it. And I think that's a very smart argument. But for him to be and frankly, a lot of other conservatives at your side and others are really raising this moral indignation about how can we trust Obama? He's unfit for the presidency because a couple issues he's shifted a little bit to the right. I think it's just, I think it's unbelievable. It's as if Obama was making his central theme that McCain lacks the experience to be president.
Yeah, I think Obama is actually making himself more fit for the presidency by doing all of these things. I would just amend slightly your characterization of my view. I do think, honesty, sincerity, genuineness, that these are all good things, but they're just not my principal concern in a politician. In general, I favor sort of a genuine change of heart on these issues as a means toward the end of sustainability. That is, I assume that if they believe it, they'll be more likely to stick with it.
Right. Yeah, and you and I disagree a little bit about how much McCain necessarily believes some of the more conservative things he said over the past several years. I think you're a little more convinced of the sincerity of his change of heart than I am. But then again,
Although I think we both agree that he doesn't care about the social issues.
Right, he doesn't care about the social issues at all. On economics, he had this line that's really starting to bite him in the butt about, what he was always saying to you guys was, I don't know anything about economics, which I think was which was not a straight talk admission. I think it was a very clever thing for him to say. He was saying, well, I'd been going around saying I'm against the Bush tax cuts and we shouldn't be giving all this money to the rich, but that was just because I didn't know anything. And so now that basically you guys can educate me and Phil Gramm will be talking to me every day, now I'll basically trust you to tell me what to believe and I'll go with that. And that he was sort of giving a framework to make conservatives understand why he was saying all these heretical things in the past and why he could be trusted in the future. Of course, once the economy became such a big issue, all these all these statements became a huge problem for him. He doesn't say that anymore, but that was sort of the history of it.
Yeah, no, and in fact, his Graham has created a little problem for him today. I don't know if you've been following the news, but Graham said it was a nation of whiners and that we're in a mental recession. Which is sort of a clever play on the phrase mental depression, I suppose. It was... so McCain had to repudiate Graham's comments while keeping Graham's economic plan as his own.
I mean, what Graham was saying was basically what a lot of conservatives and even Republicans in office were saying up until fairly recently, which is that, the Bush economy is great. We're in this fantastic boom. Look at GDP. Look at the stock market. Why are all these people saying the economy is so bad? It's because of the liberal media and sort of convincing them that the sky is falling. I think in recent months they've figured out, even sort of the top line numbers have come down, and of course the problem all along was that you weren't getting income growth. Basically, for most people, the economy
median wage stagnation.
Median wage stagnation, right? I mean, you were basically getting, it was kind of this is going to sound like some kind of cartoon left-wing thing to say, but the truth is you're getting, lots of corporate profits and very high income growth at the top, but for most people you just weren't getting the income growth. So, I think the conservative line was wrong all along, but now I think even they're not saying it, but Graham is sort of still saying that the talking points from 6 to 12 months ago.
Yeah, well, I mean, depending on what he meant, he is, I think, correct that people have been more quick to say that we're in a recession than the evidence has actually suggested. But the technical question of whether we're in a recession or not strikes me as not actually all that important in terms of how people feel and their actual economic conditions. So I do think that that there's been not really so much sort of political bias on the part of the press, but just sort of a breathlessness to the descriptions of the macroeconomic situation. But one thing that strikes me is that even when the growth numbers were sufficiently strong that no economists were actually saying it was a recession, majority of the public thought so, and that, it seemed to me, suggested that there was something going on in the economy affecting voters that Republicans should pay attention to, rather than simply say, well, if you look at these statistics, you'll see that you're wrong and everything's actually going great.
Right. Well, what they were basically saying is that you should be happy because your boss just bought a second summer home. I'm sorry, I didn't sound like too much of a populist, but who cares?
Or you should be happy because your healthcare costs are going up, right? I mean, what the Republicans. Exactly, right. Because seriously, some conservative economists would say, well, but if you look at total compensation, it's going up. Yeah, but that doesn't. A lot of that's just healthcare costs. That doesn't. Right. It's not felt as a pay increase by the worker, even if it is felt as a pay increase by the employer.
Right. Right. Yeah, that was in the Wall Street Journal all the time. The total compensation argument. And the other thing, with Graham, just from a pure optics point of view, is I think he sort of recognized this after his presidential run. He's not the best face for conservative economics. And within the comment, it's just it reminded me so much of just Potter in It's a Wonderful Life. It's just he really is sounding. John Kerry had this problem from time to time. From the opposite point of view, just like the stereotype of the worst people think of his party. It's just the banker just telling people to stop whining about the fact that they're feeling a lot of economic pain. It's it's the optics are there's no video of it.
Yeah.
It's not the message McCain wants.
Yeah, I suppose the only sort of saving grace in Graham's case over Kerry is at least that he came from a hardscrabble background. But
right.
Yeah. No question. I think Graham probably got the message today. Although I don't know if you saw the Washington Post, he was reiterating, "Well, I didn't say anything wrong," but that doesn't mean he's going to say it again.
Yeah. And it's mystifying. I wonder why he would say that. Do you think it's just that he's in a bubble where he's making millions of dollars, his friends are mostly making, 6-7-figure incomes, they're all doing great? He's reading off the old talking points. Why do you think he said this?
Well, his explanation on the Nation of Whiners thing is he's talking about our leadership, not the public at large, and he uses the oil price as an example where everybody just wants to blame speculators on left and right, it turns out, including some people on my own website, that sort of thing. I think he was sort of not thinking about the political ramifications of what he was saying, or certainly saying it on the record.
Yeah.
This is a guy, in the 96 when he ran for president, one of his campaign lines was that there are too many people in the wagon, they need to come out and help the rest of us pull. That's... I
thought that was a very effective line, don't you think? An attack on welfare recipients? What's the...
I don't know if in 95, 96, particularly, you remember the winter of 95, 96, people were actually having the same kinds of fears about, at the time, the New York Times was running this big downsizing of America series, and there was some concern about wage stagnation then. It wasn't,
I thought it fed into it.
Well calculated for the moment. But.
I don't know, but he's talking about people in the welfare wagon who need to get out and help the rest of us pull. I mean, so it's, you may be feeling insecure about your own situation, but like you can instead of blaming the rich guys, you blame people on welfare who you're having to pull their weight for them.
Well, it didn't let him even get to New Hampshire, so
it certainly wasn't enough. I'll grant you that.
Right.
He had some other weaknesses. I mean, the fact that his signature line was about how much money he was raising was...
Oh, yeah. The best friend in politics, right? Ready cash. Well, he's hoping that the Obama campaign confirms the rule that he set, and I suppose that John Connolly set in the 1980 race.
Do you think Gramm is still a leading candidate for Treasury Secretary if McCain wins?
He says he's not particularly interested in the job, but I think he would be a it's one thing that is sort of interesting is when McCain flatlined last summer. He called up Gramm and really got Gramm more involved in the campaign because he needed a budget cutter. He said, "Look, I mean, I don't know what's going on with my completely with my finances, but I know that we're in pretty bad shape, and I need you to take a look at them and identify places where we should lay people off and so forth." And that suggests to me a pretty high degree of trust in somebody's economic judgment, maybe not sort of economic policy judgment, but economic judgment.
It's kind of the weird reverse of that movie, Dave. Do you remember that movie? Do you ever see that? It's not very good.
Yeah, I think I found other uses for my
the regular
dollar.
Guy who becomes president. It's sort of the reverse of it. What he does is he brings in his accountant friend to look at the federal budget.
Yeah.
So, like, here McCain is bringing in his public policy expert friend to look at his own budget.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the reverse.
Yeah.
Which is generally not a good idea, but it did seem to work for in this case.
Yeah, no, I guess it did, and maybe it helped, Gramm indulge his passion for throwing people out of work. Sorry, that was a complete cheap shot.
I don't think any of these people are starving.
That was a pure cheap shot.
Yeah.
I couldn't help but make it. He does kind of strike me as the kind of guy who would really enjoy that, but I have no proof for it. I can't back that up at all.
But this is what you liberal reporters do, isn't it?
To take cheap shots, but then we feel guilty about it and obsess and overcompensate the other direction.
Okay, well, good. Well, I'll wait for that in the rest of our
overcompensation.
Rest of our conversation. Yeah.
What do you think of some of the stories we've seen about the sort of organization or lack thereof in the McCain campaign? Is this? I've seen some stories in the mainstream press, but I haven't seen a whole lot of conservative commentary recently. To me, reading a lot of these stories makes it look like they really don't know what they're doing. It just sounds like absolute chaos. But I don't know. What are you hearing about this?
Hearing and seeing a lot of improvisation, actually, the New Republic carried a story yesterday about how difficult it is to pin McCain down on policy, but is he completely getting rid of the AMT? Is he going to get rid of the employer-provided health insurance tax exclusion? And I don't think that is a matter of the McCain campaign being cagey and trying to have things both ways. I think that they have a very, very lean policy shop, and they're not a terribly well coordinated organization. And you kind of, I think there's a lot of. Look, I think if Republicans looking at the McCain campaign, they would say, every week I talk to some Republican who will say something like, "I'm amazed that McCain is doing as well in the polls against Obama as he is," and Pollster.com has him about 4.6 points down in its weighted average of the polls. But they also say he should have used those months from February to the beginning of June, when Obama and Clinton were still fighting each other, and he had become the presumptive nominee, to really build his organization, and they are not convinced that that's happened.
Yeah. I think it's right that he he's doing better than he should be, given the underlying circumstances, and that reflects the fact that McCain has a really strong brand name. I think the public and the press hasn't caught up to the fact that he's just become a much more orthodox Republican than he used to be. I think he still has the reputation from 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. But he's a strong candidate. McCain, and of course, there's the element of his personal story, which is an amazing. Which is an amazing thing, and that's that's just a huge asset.
But this year,
and Obama has some weaknesses.
Yeah.
I think his main one just being black. To be honest, I think you've got a lot of voters who aren't going to vote for him no matter what, who otherwise would vote for a white Democrat. So you combine those two things. I think McCain is going to, he's going to overperform what people would want versus a generic Democrat versus Republican.
Yeah, I myself tend to think that Obama's blackness will net as a wash for him, maybe even a slight net positive, just because I think there are more people who are excited about the idea and wanting to see that first. But it is an X factor, right? I mean, it's the sort of thing where people are not going to be honest to pollsters about it, and we're not, we're not going to know really until, if we ever do, until after the election's over. I guess one thing I would say is that, given that this is, as everybody says, it is a bit of a cliche, the phrase, it's a Democratic year, and that means that McCain has less margin for error than Obama does.
Right.
And so when you see, even if it's just half a week, for the McCain campaign and a lot of the coverage to be consumed by this, what's going to happen with the organization of the campaign, and is Mike Murphy coming in or not, that's a distraction the campaign doesn't need. Yeah,
I predicted online that there will be another reorganization. That that sort of, especially since Murphy's sitting there still talking to McCain every day, apparently telling him, that like your staff is screwing you up, they're making you be orthodox, you need to run as the maverick you are. It's all their fault. You could be winning. And as week after week goes by, if he's still behind in the polls, Murphy's going to be like, the last donut sitting in the box on the seat next to McCain on the plane. Like the longer he goes and he's behind, that donut's going to look tastier and tastier, and he's going to eat it.
He could end up with Mitt Romney as his vice presidential candidate for the same reason. It'll just be the nearest stand and the last one standing.
Yeah, that's right. That's a really good point.
An expensive donut or something like that. I don't know.
The other flip side that I've been making about, yes, McCain's really doing pretty close, and if you just look at the number, you could say, hey, there, it's anybody's ball game. But I do think that of the events that we know that are going to happen between now and November, I think they're more likely to favor Obama. Now, there'll be lots of events that we don't know about, and they could have huge impacts.
What do you have in mind as events that we know?
The three are, first, I think that the Democratic convention, I think Obama's going to, he's really good at that. He's going to knock it out of the park.
Yeah, scripted speeches, he's quite a good
great
performer.
Yeah, and he's going to have a chance to introduce himself to lots of people who have never really seen him before, and he makes a really good impression in that forum. So I think a lot of people who have questions about him are going to have a positive impression. Mm-hmm. I think McCain is less good at his convention, and he's going to be weighted down heavily by Bush speaking and that's unavoidable. Bush is going to speak, I think, the first night of the convention, and that McCain will try to draw attention away from that, but that'll be a high-profile event for Bush, and that's not good for McCain. So I think, you're going to have Obama get a much bigger bounce out of his convention than McCain. And then third, you've got the debates, where, I think you do have a lot of people who have questions about Obama with his experience. Mm-hmm. And it's very much going to be like Reagan in 1980. And I think, Obama is, I concede, a very inexperienced presidential candidate. But he's also, I think, very smart and very knowledgeable about public policy. And I think he can speak at least as intelligently on the issues, even foreign policy, as McCain. He's just, I think he's smarter than McCain. I mean, McCain's not dumb, but Obama's very, very, very smart. And I think Obama probably spends more time studying up on the issues than McCain does. And I think he'll hold his own, and I think he'll clear that threshold. And I think that'll probably be a big benefit.
Well, I suppose one question about that is, will the expectations be higher for Obama as this fluid, eloquent, smart guy? Or will the McCain folks make the mistake of building up his experience so much that they've got the expectations higher for them, and then one more question would be, does it really matter? Do we political journalists obsess too much about the expectations question?
That's right. I mean, the coverage is one thing, but a lot of people are just going to be watching the debates and say, "Hey, this guy, I could feel comfortable with him as president because he can." I don't think that's necessarily a fair test.
Yeah.
And I think the expectations will be way too low. But even the mere fact that he'll be able to, say the names of some foreign leaders and some policies and do some of the think tank paper stuff.
See, I do not find Obama all that impressive off the cuff or in debates. And I think,
it's true.
Just that thing he did was it yesterday or the day before about you should be worrying about your own kids learning Spanish, not immigrants' kids learning English. Leaving aside the merits of what he had to say, certainly the way he expressed the thought was politically foolish. And it's just not the sort of thing that it would have happened in one of his script speeches.
No doubt.
So, I don't think he did all that fantastically well against Hillary Clinton in the debates, particularly just the two of them.
That's true. Although I think he did much better at the end than he did at the beginning. And again, I agree. He's definitely not at his best there because he's too. Again, I think he's like too professorial. He doesn't just. He doesn't just get his 4 points and just like fire them out. He wants to. He doesn't really know how to whittle it all down. He wants to have a discursive, exegesis on the subject where he sort of concedes the following things and finds his way to the middle position. Which doesn't always work in the format. But again, I do think, the important thing for him will just be demonstrating knowledge.
Yeah.
And clearing a bar, and I think he can do that.
Well, a thought that's not exactly really relevant.
Why not?
But
in the world of
my
sports,
sense is that if these candidates were matched up against each other in, so to speak, a normal year, or even a year that looked sort of bad for the Republicans, McCain would be winning.
Yes.
But that it's really this disastrous year for Republicans, which has made Obama the favorite, right? That almost any other year that if they had run, this would not actually even be a close contest.
Well, I don't know if it would not be. I'm not sure if it would be close, but I agree. If this happened 4 years ago, McCain would be the favorite.
Yeah,
I do think.
Or 8.
I do think some of the John Judas Rui Teixeira emerging Democratic majority thesis is starting to come through a little bit. I think you're seeing. I don't want to say a realignment, but I think the hardcore Democratic base has really grown.
Yeah,
and so I don't think you. It's even if the economy was great this year, I don't think you would see Democrats getting blown out the way they would be in 1984.
Yeah. Well, you shouldn't. I mean, you haven't had a 1984 margin since 1984, so
yeah, or maybe like 1988. I just think I think that the number of just Democrats out there is pretty big. I mean, I've been pointing to like 3 numbers, and I hope I can remember them all off the top of my head. But number one is people who express strong disapproval of President Bush. Not just disapproval, but strong disapproval. And that's about low 51, 52, sometimes 54%.
Yeah, that's right.
People who want to see a Democrat, he's asking them, do you want a Democrat or a Republican to win the White House? It's about 51 to 35 or 36, who want a Democrat. And the third one is just party identification, which is also, it's about the same number. It's, Democrats and Democrat leaders are about 52%, and Republicans and Republican leaders are in the mid to high 30s. So, I think basically you've got, in all those 3 numbers, you've got about the same number. You've got something about 51 to 52, 53% of people. So I think that's...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that's the Democratic, base, basically.
I keep hearing these Republicans say things about, McCain's doing just as well among Republicans as Obama's doing among Democrats. He's really solidified his base. Well, in 2008, that's a smaller base, so it just isn't. It's not that impressive. It's not really something to brag about. But McCain is running ahead of his party, and Obama's running behind his. And if the Republicans pull out this presidential race, that's going to be why.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. No, I agree. And it's really hard to separate where we are in 2008 from where we are in general. I mean, in part, the reason why some of these constituencies are so Democratic is because of George W. Bush and what's been happening in the country. That's why you have so many people with graduate degrees have become so strongly Democratic. Postgraduate education. That's why I think in part so many young people. But I think also some of it is secular trends. By secular, I don't mean religious. Things that.
You're right. Long-term trends.
Demographic trends, which is not to say that there's any kind of electoral lock or majority. It's just that I think there's been a generalized trend demographically in the Democratic direction over the past 8 years or more, and that was obscured by September 11th and the aftermath of that. But basically have left. We're talking about a game of inches. But have left the Democrats in a generically stronger position than they were.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I would think of it as sort of a reassertion of the trend of the late 1990s, following sort of the blip of September 11th. But but we'll see. I mean, and I guess that's as good a note as any to close this on and say, good talking to you, John.
All right, happy trails, Ramesh.
Take care.
Okay.